been excited by the fact that we have a lot of folks that are online and signed up, but for all the good reasons, folks have gotten back into the mood of talking and just breaking in and chatting with us in the chat window. And as close as we can get to being together, we have been. And now that I know 75% of you are willing to travel in October, we're going to try and find out what location we'll be in, and we'll be all back together at least.
Okay.
But if you can't, we'll still have a hybrid version and we'll work it out. All right. So let me introduce Bob Cooper. Oh my gosh. So excited to have you with us and in person. We had some conflicts. We thought Bob was going to have to be recorded and then maybe take questions at the end, but he's with us and that's great. If you haven't met Bob, Bob is the founder and president of Product Development Institute. He is an ISBM fellow, and he's the creator of the world famous stage gate process, which I'm sure many of you run. He was named the world's top innovation management scholar by the Journal of Product Innovation Management. He has combined practical and consulting with groundbreaking research for so many years. He has several books, Winning at New Products, Portfolio Management for New Products, over 140 academic articles, 11 books, and he's the guy to talk to about this. Bob, are you going to talk at all about that little article you wrote during COVID in here somewhere? I hope.
The pandemic pivot.
Yeah, if not, I'm going to just say that
okay.
Keeping an eye on things. You were keeping an eye on things all through this pandemic and reporting on them. So
what Lynn's talking about was an article that. I just sort of put out a feeler to a lot of colleagues around the world, business people, and said, what are you doing in the area of product development these days? Have you shut it down or are you active? And boy, some of them came back with fantastic stories about how they made amazing pivots and came out almost instantaneously with great new products in response to the new situation they were facing. So that pandemic pivot article, Lynn, you can make available to, it was sort of a fun article, a lot of stories in it.
Fabulous story.
And somewhat inspirational. And that sort of led to this more serious discussion and paper that recently got published in a more legitimate journal, shall we say. Okay.
All right, well, we're off to you. You take it over,
okay.
Bob.
Okay, well, we are roaring out of this recession we faced last year. And obviously the need for product innovation is more important than ever. The pandemic taught us a couple of things. If you watch the speed of the development of the vaccines, you probably were amazed that they were able to take a 15-year process and collapse it to 1 year. I mean, this is unheard of. But these guys, the vaccine companies, the Pfizers and the Modernas and the AstraZenecas weren't the only folks doing this. Lots of other companies, perhaps that didn't make the headlines, were also getting new products, new services, and new business models done overnight. So warp speed development is possible, and it's amazing. These guys showed it was possible. Now, in many cases, they were using methods that were new to them, but not necessarily new to the world. People knew about these methods. It's just that they hadn't been used too much. The COVID vaccine developments were quite incredible. Some of the companies used new development methods. For example, parallel processing. It's been talked about before. Concurrent engineering is the predecessor. Simultaneous execution, different words. And of course, we've heard about the rolling approval process. And not waiting for the completion of one task before starting the next. They called it rapid manufacturing. All kinds of tricks and techniques, not necessarily so revolutionary, but perhaps revolutionary to that company in that they'd never done it before. The other thing we found out about is that if you resource projects properly, it's amazing how fast they'll get done, because most people do exactly the opposite. They under-resource projects to the point they take forever to get to market. Acceleration is not a new concept. It's been talked about by pundits, experts, researchers for decades. The most successful new product in history, according to most metrics, is the Steve Jobs' famous iPod, which was the first of a series of iProducts that took Apple from an almost on the rails company to one of the most successful companies in history. That was the first of them. That came out in about 2001. It was done by Steve Jobs as the project leader. The amazing thing is, even though it's considered the most successful product in recent history, Steve Jobs' team did it in 9 months. It is absolutely incredible to me that the most successful product ever didn't take 5 years or 10 years, 9 months, because they focused and they got the job done. We'll take a look at some of the tricks these companies do to get products to market in record speed. The first challenge most companies face is they're trying to do too much. They're attacking on too many fronts. This is a benchmarking study that we were involved in through the APQC, American Productivity and Quality Center, on best practices and worst practices in product development. And about 500 APQC member firms took part in this study. Here's some of the results. Do you have too many development projects underway for the resources available? Look at this, folks. 96% of poor performing businesses said far too many projects. Even average companies, it was about 3/4 of them had too many projects underway, development projects underway. And the top performers, not perfect either. The dark blue bars are the best performing companies as judged by a panel of judges on a number of criteria. Best performing in terms of product innovation, that is. The bright blue bar is the average company, and this pale turquoise bar is the worst performance. Here's another one. We have got a lot of small projects in our portfolio, far too unbalanced the portfolio. Again, huge percentage of companies facing this kind of issue. I'm just going to reduce the, sorry, just want to make a bit of a check here, reduce the bar down the side of my screen here. Few or no high value projects in our development pipeline. 100% of poor performers didn't have any high value projects. So we have a situation, bad project prioritization. There's another issue. We don't have any method for prioritizing projects in our business. Every project's high priority, in other words, and few businesses have a portfolio management process in place to pick and choose and make the right projects to do, prioritize them, and allocate resources to the right projects. Portfolio management is a term that, of course, first got used in the area of finance, running a stock market portfolio. And most of those guys have that are running portfolios in the stock and bond market do have some kind of methodology for picking and choosing stocks and bonds. Not so in product development. How unfortunate. Every new product project is an investment, and like the financial sector, you can have portfolio methods in place to help you pick and choose and balance your portfolio. Best performing companies, the darker blue bar, are far from perfect, but they're a lot better on these metrics. But one of the things I come out of, many studies have been done on portfolio management, is one of the principal reasons for projects taking too long to get to market is they're trying to do too many projects, and often the wrong projects, the wrong ones. So the solution seems to be, and there's been a number of pundits have said this over the years, put in place effective portfolio management, or if you prefer the term, effective pipeline management of your development pipeline. Maximize the productivity of your portfolio. And the goal, or the answer seems to be, do fewer projects, but better projects. Instead of doing a lot of mediocre, half-baked projects, small projects. And the trick is resource your good projects properly and get them done as quickly as possible to start getting revenue and get cash in your jeans. That seems to be the idea here. Now, I'm going to show you an example, and this is a little bit complicated, and you can get but I did want to show you an example of an actual company going through this, and you'll see the mess they were in. This is a real company. Now, this is one bucket of projects. They had 16 projects, and these are all large and bolder, major projects in their development portfolio. I believe overall they had more than 150 projects in the total portfolio, but this is just the 16 larger ones. This company divides projects into buckets: large projects, medium projects, small projects, etc. So we walked into the portfolio review. The general manager of the business unit, this is a European company, by the way, so it's none of you guys, so I can talk about it fairly openly. The general manager, or managing director as he was called, was in the room. He's the chief portfolio manager. Obviously, he makes the investment decisions, or he makes most of the investment decisions. They had 16 projects, and this is the full-time equivalent people allocated to each one for a total of 26 R&D people, as it turns out. Okay, because they typically counted resources by R&D people. Marketing people, of course, are free, right? And that was the situation. And we looked at this and it was a bit of a mess. And he was complaining that every project is taking far too long. Every project's at least a couple of months, if not longer, behind schedule. What is going on here? He wanted to know. Well, his portfolio manager, and he did have a portfolio manager, then started showing us more information. Oh, by the way, these are the projects, and these are the full-time equivalent resources going to them, adding up to 26 full-time equivalent people. Okay, ludicrous here. Look at this project Mama, 0.1 of a person, or half a person, or 0.2 of a person. Come on, get real here. No wonder they're not getting any progress. Total 26 people doing work on the projects. That's the complement of people available. Now, the project leader had requested resources to get his or her project done in a reasonable time. And this is the resources required or resources requested, reasonable resources requested that he or she had made at the previous gate meeting. At every gate meeting, the project leader in this company was required to make a request for resources because the gate reviews were considered resource allocation meetings. And as you add this up, you'll see that the resources requested by the project leaders were 60 versus 26. In other words, almost 3 times as much resources. Okay, wow, no wonder we got a problem here. No wonder the general manager or managing director is a little bit annoyed. Everything's going very slowly. Now, we had some other data put up on the screen, and I hope you have this data. One of the things this company used was a scorecard, a scoring model to talk about the attractiveness, the relative attractiveness of projects out of 100 points. And the gatekeepers, the leadership team of the business for these bigger projects anyway, scored projects on about 6 or 7 criteria on 10-point scales out of a score of 100. So this is the top project that's got 88 points out of 100, and this is the lowest project, 64 points out of 100. Another metric these guys used, and I hope you're using it too, it's called the productivity index. It basically says how much money do you make for every additional day you work on the project. So the project team that works on this project, C2, for every day they spend on the project, they make $150,000. This project team is much more productive. For every day they spend on their project, they make $340,000. Okay, so productivity index. I hope it's basically the net present value divided by the number of days required to complete the project. Okay, based on these 2 sets of metrics, the company, right in that room, we did a prioritization exercise by sort of eyeballing across these 2. And these projects ended up being 1 to 6. I've already pre-ordered them. They didn't show up originally in this order. So these are 1 to 6, and these are all the way down to 16. So the first step in this meeting, and we were able to move projects up and down the list here because the portfolio management had the ability to re-rank projects on a list on the Excel spreadsheet right on the screen. So we ended up with a list, a prioritized list of 16 projects. And as we come down the list, you begin to realize a very interesting thing. The first one's going to take 3, give this one 3, give this one 3. We're up to 9. Now we're up to 21. Wow. We suddenly hit the resource limit around here. They decided to give this first project 3. Asked for 3, got 3. Right now he's getting 0.5. This project got 3 also. This project didn't quite get as much as he wanted. This project got, oh, this is an exec sponsored project. I remember that one well. That the managing director was sponsoring that project. This guy gets 3 out of 5. This guy gets, and we hit our 26. Right then and there, folks, by doing this ranking exercise based on 2 excellent criteria, we drew the line after project number 6. Said those are the ones we're going to do. These ones that I've designated in red, they went on hold or were designated for an immediate gate meeting, and some were actually killed within the next month. So the point was, do fewer projects but better projects, but you need some kind of system to rank order your projects and then draw a line. Projects above the line you do, projects below the line you don't do. You either kill them or put them on hold. And in this way, you focus your resources on the really good projects, get them done and get them done fast. So that's one key thing, one key step that I'd suggest strongly. Build in a series of portfolio reviews, typically 3 months apart, where the leadership team of the business looks at least at the important projects anyway, the larger projects, and does a forced ranking and then draws a line and gets rid of some of them. Most companies have far too many projects. They don't have the discipline to do this. Okay, second challenge, and it's sort of similar to this one, it's a lack of resources per project, a lack of focus. Project team members are spread far too thinly across too many projects. Okay, where are we? Some of you have heard of Agile development. Agile development is a methodology that was developed in Palo Alto or Silicon Valley by software people to accelerate the development of software projects. One of the tenets or one of the principles of Agile development is the project team member, and this is a project team in an Agile project. The project team is a small group of people, 5, 6, 7, large, in this case, largely code writers, with every day devoted to one project. In other words, they don't work on 6 projects. They don't have a day job and this project job. It's 100% 24/7 on the one project. And you know what? They get the thing done. They get it done in record time. And I think it's rather interesting that the Moderna project, development of the Moderna vaccine, got literally unlimited resources. I think the US government gave them or made available $2.5 billion, and Dolly Parton made available another $1 million to Moderna. I mean, they had unlimited resources, so they were able to focus. And one of the things I found out from the BioNTech, I read the story of the man and his wife who run that BioNTech company, a smaller business located on the other side of the Rhine River from Frankfurt in a town called Mainz. I think it was late January, early February, when he heard about, the owner of the company had heard about this Wuhan virus. He basically sent an email to all his employees, his key employees, and said, it was a holiday weekend, a vacation weekend, don't go away skiing because Monday morning we're starting a project. He set up 2 teams, 2 teams who worked on different facets of the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine. BioNTech actually developed it, Pfizer commercialized it. And set up 2 teams who worked 24/7, literally. They worked enormously long hours and they worked 7 days a week, and that's the only thing they did until they got the project done. Now, what about your company? What about people in B2B? What about physical product companies who are not developing software? Are you really going to have dedicated project teams? Really? How many of you have even close to dedicated teams where you only work on the one project and get it done, just like the BioNTech guys did with the Pfizer vaccine? Physical product development, you might argue, of course, is a little different than that vaccine development or software development. It requires a cross-functional team, not just people from R&D, scientists or code writers, but also from marketing, operations, and even sales. And these people aren't going to work on the project full-time. They got their full-time jobs. True. And getting 100% dedicated resources from these functions, the other thing I should have mentioned is co-located in the same room. The project team has one room and that's where they live. Boy, that's going to be a real challenge in your business. And also manufacturing type new product projects, like most of you are in, have waiting times built in. For example, waiting for test results, or waiting for field trials to be done, or waiting for the delivery of a certain piece of equipment, or waiting for the factory to make some trial production runs. So it makes sense for a team member to be working on 2 or more projects concurrently. Trouble is that gets out of hand. What we're finding out is that some companies have adopted a new approach, an almost dedicated team. Call it a focus team. Tetra Pak is a good example. Tetra Pak is the world's largest packaging company. They're using a form of Agile for product development that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. But they've been experimenting with how dedicated does the team have to be in order to get things done on time. They started out with teams with people who dedicated 50% of their time. And they found that didn't work at all because the other 50% was spent on 6 other things, which consumed everything. Then they moved to 70% dedication. The rule being, if you're on a project team, you must spend 70% of your time on that project. They found that was a lot better, but not optimal. Now the rule is this. You spend 70% of your time, no less, on this one project, and then you can take 30% of your time on other things, but no more than one other thing. This works, but they might even have to move to 100%. Now, that was a quote taken from them about a year ago. They have not moved to 100%. But they do require that if you got a high priority project, you spend at least 70% of your time on it if you are a team member. Now, if you do relax this one project requirement, limit the maximum, maybe a maximum of 2 projects per person. And each team member should devote the same 2 days per week to this project, especially if you're using an Agile methodology, so you can be together for the weekly scrums. Most manufacturers use Scrum meetings in product development because Scrum attendance is very important. These focus teams, here's another company, I won't get into the details of who they are, strange name, it's an Austrian company. They basically like the idea of a mostly dedicated team with some team members devoting the majority of their time to the one project for a specified number of days per week. And the core team members work together on this designated project, maybe for Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So they're in the room together, so there's perfect and instant communication. Again, for the 2 to 3 stand-up or Scrum meetings that they hold for these projects, the entire team is present. They also limit the number of other projects. And so the result is that the core team is protected from outside disruptions and diversions, and they can get on with the job. Other companies make some exceptions, compromises. For example, they have the marketing people dedicated for a single sprint if you're using an Agile type approach. Lego in Denmark uses that approach. They say the marketing folks will be dedicated for 3 weeks straight to the project, maybe while they're doing a voice of customer study or something like that, or customer feedback. And so they'll have certain functions dedicated for 100% of their time for a 3-week period. Or you can also limit the Agile facet of this dedicated team facet to only the development and testing stages. And other companies use an interlude. We came across a Danish small business that was making modular power supply equipment. They were using 2-week sprints in which the team members were 100% dedicated to the project, followed by a 1-week moratorium where they were allowed to work on other things and go back to other responsibilities and duties. And it obviously capped the amount of other work. The idea here is that if you're gonna get things done quickly, like the BioNTech Pfizer project was done, you gotta have dedicated or at least almost dedicated teams. When people start spreading themselves over 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 projects, nothing gets done. Everything moves at a crawl. Here's another solution. Only the major and critical projects are done with a dedicated team. For example, Corning Glass had the rule that 20% of their projects have dedicated teams. These are the top priority ones. The rest, people are spread. So the top priority projects have dedicated teams. Chamberlain, you might recognize them if you go to Home Depot. They're a company that makes automated garage door openers, remote control garage door openers, also industrial doors and gates at loading docks, etc. They basically say dedicated teams are not feasible for every project, so we use an Agile stage gate for only the larger major revenue generating projects. Coincidentally, the same percent that Corning was using, 20%, these are the big projects. We will use dedicated teams. So there's different ways of handling this business of dedicated teams. So those are 2 approaches, both dealing with resources, which seems to be the biggest factor that slows projects down, a lack of dedicated resources. And so focus teams and more effective portfolio management, that example I showed, seem to be the two ways that people are dealing with this very effectively. Now, here's a third approach: how to accelerate projects. In the last decade, a whole lot of new digital approaches have suddenly been adopted, proposed and adopted, and I just put this chart up. This is a survey done by one of the big consulting firms, PwC. Some of the things, for example, data analytics and artificial intelligence being used in product development to accelerate. These are digital champions. These are identified as the top performers here. The percentage of companies using these, social listening, that would be more for consumer goods companies, agile development, coming up with digital twins, and so on. These are a variety of techniques that people have adopted in order to accelerate the development process. And as you can see, the shaded part here and the shaded part on the right-hand side, many of these companies are moving much more to these approaches. So here are some of the newer technologies. I guess the first one that we saw a decade or two ago was rapid prototyping or 3D printing, and that was the precursor. That was the thing that sort of kicked off all these new digital techniques to getting product development done faster. Rapid prototyping in the last decade has become much more ubiquitous. It's much cheaper, and it basically solves the number one reason for new product failure: the lack of understanding of customer needs. Steve Jobs had a famous quotation in his book by Abrahamson: "People don't know what they want until you show it to them." So the message here is: get something out in front of your customers, often, early, fast, and cheap. Another expression is fail often, fail early, fail cheap. Another way of saying it. So get something out in front of the customer or user very early in the development process. Don't wait to the very end, to the field trials. Get something out early. This is the notion of iterative development. And rapid prototyping is one digital tool or electronic tool that makes this possible. You're able to put together something very, very quickly, much earlier in the development process than you could in previous days. Some people are even using 3D printing to come up with the manufactured version. This is a 3D printed turboprop engine that GE first put together before developing the final version. I'm not sure I would have wanted to fly on a plane with this, but fine for testing at an on-ground testing site. Other digital testing technologies are being used in a similar way. Simulations test new products technically and allow also customer testing of a virtual product. Volvo, for example, truck manufacturer, tests new construction equipment, vehicles that don't even exist yet. Here's a typical Volvo off-highway vehicle. This is their simulation. This particular simulation is not unlike a flight simulator that allows a truck driver, a construction truck driver, to drive the vehicle and experience the vehicle and make all kinds of feedback comments when no vehicle actually exists. It's all software. And then finally, artificial intelligence to predict the outcomes of technical tests and speed up the R&D process. The pharmaceutical industry, and since they've been in the news of late, I'll use them as an example. They see the power of artificial intelligence. Basically, they're arguing that the stepwise serial process of R&D is becoming hyper-iterative and integrative, shifting the direction of the R&D pivots in real time. By being able to predict using artificial intelligence what the outcome of that experiment in the lab will be, they're able to shift the direction of their research much, much faster. And a number of these companies, some of them quite familiar names, have now got partnerships with AI startups to discover new drug candidates. But it's not just for chemistry and pharmacology, it's also in a number of other fields of product development. AI is actively being used in planning, implementation, fine-tuning of interlocking railway equipment product lines and systems. Next generation of Nissan vehicles, and so on. 14% of the most advanced firms are using AI, artificial intelligence, for new product development. And they earn more than 30% of their revenues from fully digital products. So it's coming. Artificial intelligence is speeding up the development process. And in fact, there was an article not too long ago that showed how AI was used during the development of the COVID vaccines to identify candidates, predict outcomes, and really speed up the new product process. So digital methods. digital methods. Now, in the last 15 minutes here, before I take questions, I'm going to talk about two different approaches to the new product process. As most of you know, I sort of did the stage gate process. It's been updated and revised many, many times. Here's the latest two things. One of them is sort of a no-brainer. It's something that every time we've done it with companies, it's quite easy to do. It doesn't cost very much, and yet it's remarkable the improvements that it achieves. And that's basically streamlining your existing process that's probably out of date, cumbersome, clunky, and has a lot of work that adds no value. Getting rid of that. Many companies' idea to launch systems, whether they're stage gate or phase review or whatever system you're using, have a lot of stuff in them that isn't really needed. Long lists of required tasks and activities, lengthy deliverables lists, many templates to be filled out, PowerPoint shows being presented. It goes on and on. And sometimes this is the result of a process design that's been done by a committee or is been influenced by people from different functions who normally might be part of this committee, with each committee member with an agenda of things that have to be built into the system. Different departments from legal to finance, each write out the requirements. I recall one company whose name will not be mentioned here, and they're not IBM, they happen to be in White Plains as well, headquartered there in New York. I went to a meeting some years ago where the project leaders were complaining that the business case, the templates that have been required for the business case, now had been taken over by headquarters functions, the legal department, the environmental department, the diversity department, the intellectual property department, and on and on and on. And that were more materials had to be filled out for those groups than what a business case is really all about in a new product project. So fortunately, we had a CTO that was very tough, and he basically looked at this and said, come on, guys, this is getting nuts. You know, the appendices are getting longer than the full report, as it were, and basically streamlined the whole thing. Most stage gate or gating processes over time become far too bulky. I often am invited into a company, they show me their new product process, and I want to be polite. After all, they've invited me there, I'm the guest, but I have to hold myself back from saying, you got to be kidding. You know, this is far too much. It's overkill. Is all this really needed? If it doesn't add value, why is it in your system? One of the principles of Agile is to maximize the amount of work you don't do. In other words, if it doesn't add value, get rid of it. Now, how do you do it? Well, the Lean Six Sigma guys showed us how to do it on the factory floor. You remember those guys? Started around the year 2000, Lean Six Sigma became all the buzz. They applied a number of neat methodologies called value stream analysis that enabled us to cut all kinds of waste and inefficiencies out of the factory floor. Golly, gee whiz, maybe we can use the same methodology here. Let's use the Lean Six Sigma method and focus on the value stream in product development. Now, what is a value stream in product development? It's the connection of all the process steps with the goal of maximizing customer value. How do you do it? Oh, by the way, this is the beginning of a sketched out value stream from a real company that I work with. It went on for a number of screens. This is just the first few steps. You start with an idea, it goes to this committee, it's go or kill, et cetera, all the different steps the process goes through. Here's how you do it. You get a task force comprised of knowledgeable people in your business that have been there and done that. They've done a number of projects. These are experienced people. And they map out a typical new product project. And they map it out typically on a wall with a roll of about 30 feet of paper, 10 meters of paper, big roll of paper. And you can't do it on a computer screen. You don't have enough room. Typically, we use Post-it notes, these large 6-inch Post-it notes, put them on the wall until we map out the entire process. By the way, this is the process for a typical new product project. What really happens, not what the manual says should happen, but what really happens in our projects. And then after they've mapped it out, and this usually takes about an hour or two to map out the process beginning to end, the full 30 feet of the process. And then the task force starts at this end and they walk along and they identify every activity and discuss it. And they identify anything that's not needed and brainstorm ways to remove it or reduce the amount of time it takes. Now, here's one company I worked with in Europe. I'm using some European companies here, so I don't get into confidentiality issues as much. This is a company that actually allowed me to use their name. They're called Danfoss. They're in the controls business. It's mostly hardware, but some software. They basically decided to implement Agile methodology into their new product process. And they were a very early mover on most of these things. They actually started talking about this about 2010. But before they got into Agile, the head of R&D, a guy called Bobe Jorgensen, came to me and said, you know, we're gonna do this. What's our first step? And I said, well, your first step is to fix your existing process. Because if you apply Agile methods to a bad process, it just makes it worse. It just makes all the deficiencies more evident, more transparent. So he agreed. And over a 3-year period, Bobe basically focused on leaning down his existing process. And he got some amazing results. He basically was able to, using the same methodology I showed on the previous screen, take the development time from 3.5 to 4 years for major projects down to 1.5 to 2 years. Now, the TTM metric he's using, time to market metric he's using, is from his gate M0, which is a preliminary business case through to the launch date. So that's how he's measuring that metric. Basically, he got a 50% reduction in time to market by using this lean methodology. And I can honestly say I've been involved in some of these. I owned a consulting company at one point, StageGate International, and we did a number of these exercises. And I can honestly say it's not sexy, but every time we did one of these lean exercises, we were able to cut the time to market anywhere between 30 and 50%. Interestingly enough, and I've stayed in touch with Bobe Jorgensen at Danfoss, he then, about 2014, 15, around 2014 or 15, he started to put in Agile. And he's had another 30% reduction, but he got 50% from doing lean. So do the simple things first. That company I showed you 2 slides ago, this is an abbreviated version of their new product process. The real process, not the one in the manual. This is what really happens. Now, this was laid out on a piece of paper 30 feet long, as I suggested. I've abbreviated it here to fit on the screen. All the way through, they had a number of comments about what was good and what was bad. It's sort of interesting to note that the longest activity on this whole process is the field trials. This is a company that made a component for a paper machine. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what a paper machine is, but it's a machine, a pulp and paper company like International Paper would purchase to manufacture paper. It costs about $1 billion, and it's about the size of an aircraft hangar. It's a huge, huge piece of equipment. These guys this company here made a particularly important component. And basically, and a typical new product project was taking far longer than it should have. When we took a look at the new product process, we saw that field trials were taking 8 to 14 months, and there was rework. This was identified as a major problem area. Sometimes field trials were taking 3 years to get completed. Unbelievable. You know, double the development time just because of this one step. What was the solution? Well, we took the task force, invited some subject matter experts, and used a root cause analysis, or this fishbone diagram, it's called an Ichikawa diagram, in order to identify the root causes of these field trial issues. A number of root causes were identified. For example, the customer had to shut down his paper mill for us to do a field trial, and we didn't compensate him, things like that. And then we brainstormed solutions. And in fact, they were able to cut this field trial 8 to 14 months, typically 10 months, down to about 4 months. And remarkable reduction of time to market. So it's not the sexiest approach, but it sure does work. Leaning down your process by using value stream analysis, Lean Six Sigma methodologies. Sometimes your new product process analysis, the value stream analysis, reveals ways that you can save time and accelerate the process by overlapping stages in the process. Now, here's a typical new product process as was mapped out in a company. I've only shown the important steps here. These blue lines, traditional model going from idea through to launch. And in this model, the company determined it was taking about 18.8 months on average to do a major project. But by overlapping some of the activities, for example, starting this activity before the one before it finished, and starting this activity before the one before it finished. In other words, not waiting for perfect information, but move on anyway. Able to cut the cycle time from 18 down to 15. That's about almost a 20% reduction. But by overlapping the stages, they were able to get even more mileage, a 27% reduction. For example, here you notice they got into some of the initial steps in commercial rollout by moving, got into them before the field trials were even finished. This final stage here is testing and validation, field trials. They were actually doing production planning and acquisition of production equipment before the field trials are finished. That's called rapid manufacturing. In other words, moving some of the key activities and key decision points forward before the previous ones are complete. Can you imagine buying production equipment before your field trials are finished? It's risky, but it's a calculated risk. And so there are methods for determining whether it's worth the extra cost and the risk moving it forward. Very, very useful technique. By the way, this is just to show you how it could be applied. This is the traditional way of developing a vaccine in the United States, according to the GAO in the US. Exploratory, preclinical, clinical trials. This is a stage-wise process. Here's your phase 1, phase 2 clinicals. That's 10 to 15 years. And this is this comes from the US GAO, Government Accounting Office. Here's how they got Moderna done so fast. They started overlapping stages. They got the approvals underway before the field trials were even done. It's called a rolling approval process. They put production equipment and started manufacturing before the product was even approved. It's called rapid manufacturing. Basically doing things in parallel rather than doing them sequentially and speeding up the process. Is it riskier? Yes, but sometimes the risk is worth it. And you can calculate the risk and determine whether it is worth it. The last process improvement I'm going to talk about is one of my favorites. And this is basically I've mentioned it a few times this afternoon, and it's come out of Silicon Valley. And it deals with the issue that many companies, especially manufacturers, their new product process is far too rigid and inflexible and not responsive enough. If your process is a little bit clunky and a little bit rigid and maybe not flexible enough, maybe it's time to take a look at agile development methods. Now, many manufacturers, whether you're making machinery or chemical products or polymers or whatever, many of you, when you first look at these agile methods, you say, oh my goodness, this is pretty foreign and alien, and you're right. But probably there are a number of elements you can borrow without turning your company upside down. But agile development methods were developed in the 1990s by software people, largely in response to the problems they were having in Silicon Valley. I used to go to conferences back in those days, and when software people got in conversation with you, they were almost a laughingstock. The one thing the 2 or 3 things you could be guaranteed of is their developments were usually late to market, they were always over budget, and very often when the software was launched, it didn't work anyway. It's a darn good thing it was such a growing industry that it was very forgiving, and so they were allowed to make these mistakes, but they had to deal with these issues. They needed a better way to do their projects, and a number of gurus and experts came out with some of these agile methodologies, and finally they got together in a cabin in Utah in 2001 and wrote the Agile Manifesto, which is a bit like the 10 Commandments of the Agile method. If you haven't read it, it's a good read. You can Google it. It lays out, I believe, 12 principles and gets into some of the details. 2 key tenets of the Agile Manifesto are working software is delivered frequently, not at the end of the project, but in weeks rather than months or years. And working software is the principal measure of progress. Not Gantt charts, not critical path plans, not milestone reviews. Working software is the measure of progress. Forget all those other things. Now, a number of different methods were developed, but they have been pulled together into this Agile manifesto. The Scrum method is the most popular, and it is also the method that most manufacturers, B2B manufacturers, have adopted for physical products. The Agile method in the software world relies on a time-boxed iterative approach. The entire development process is broken into a series of typically 2-week sprints. You got 2 weeks in which to deliver something. And that's it, guys. Get moving. So an enormous amount of time pressure. Obviously, that's why they use dedicated teams. So the entire development project is broken down into a series of 2-week sprints. These are time boxed, meaning they start on a Monday morning, they end on a Friday afternoon, not Saturday morning, Friday afternoon, 5 p.m. That's it, it's over. And you have to demo whatever you've got at that point. Demo to customers or demo to management. So there's a demo at the end of every sprint to customers and management. These are the key stakeholders. And then there's also a review of how we did the last 2 weeks. That's called a retrospect. This is an evolutionary development and delivery approach. The product definition is very fluid and changes as development moves along. And there's also the rapid development of product versions for constant verification with customers. It's very iterative with customers. It's also adaptive planning. The longest horizon for a plan in this project is not 3 months or 6 months, it's 2 weeks. There are a series of 2-week plans, and that's the way the project is run. Wow, this is quite revolutionary compared to the traditional type of project management we're used to. Now, the good news is that some physical product B2B firms have been experimenting over the last decade, last 6 or 7 years actually, and have started to build Agile into their stage gate process with considerable degrees of success. What they've done is they haven't thrown out their gating process, they like it, but they basically thrown out their old-fashioned management methods, timelines, milestones, Gantt charts, critical path plans, all of those methods, thrown them out and replaced them with Agile project management within the stages of stage gate. That's how it works. So here's a typical process. Here's a stage gate process. Here's the state ideation concept, etc. They built a series of these sprints, these time box sprints, all the way through. Now, I haven't shown all the sprints. For example, in development, there can be 5 or 10 or maybe even 15 sprints. The sprints in a physical product are typically longer than 2 weeks. Most manufacturers have gone to 3 to 4 weeks to allow the project team enough time to come up with something they can demo. Typically about 3, sometimes 4 weeks. Each iteration starts with a planning meeting where the project team sits down and says, what can we get done in 3 weeks? And at the end of the 3 weeks, it ends with a demo to the stakeholders, management and customers. Customer sees a version of the product. It could be a prototype or an early prototype or a prototype or something that the customer can respond to. And then the end of the sprint, there's a retrospect. What kind of performance are people getting? There haven't been any US studies done yet, but several European studies. This is a major one done in Germany, involving about 400 companies, mostly engineering type companies, physical product companies, of course. Look at the results. Hardly any value, very large value of Agile. Increased flexibility to react to changes, improved team morale, shorter product development time, improved product quality, rather remarkable results across several hundred companies, large sample of companies who were moving to Agile development. Now, one point I should make is when you read the Agile literature, you'll see a lot of things that are very foreign and very alien, and there's no way you can do all of them. So the message seems to be you got to be a little bit selective here in terms of what it is you do. So a quick overview of Agile. The sprint is the basic unit. It lasts 2 to 4 weeks. In manufacturers, typically 3 or 4 weeks. These are time boxed. There's an effort of constant length, which leads to a rhythm. In other words, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Think of a football team, 10 yards, 10 yards, 10 yards, touchdown. There's a rhythm. The rhythm is called takt time. Takt is a German word for the baton of an orchestra conductor. Each sprint is preceded by a meeting called the sprint planning meeting, where they agree on what they can get done. What can we get done as a team in the next 3 weeks? We map out the tasks. We develop a 3-week plan. We hold daily stand-up or scrum meetings. Manufacturers typically don't do these daily. They typically do them 2 to 3 times a week. 15 to 20 minutes to organize each day, set priorities, shift responsibilities, figure out if we're a little bit behind schedule, how do we pick up the pace? And at the end of the sprint, there's a demo and a retrospective meeting. The retrospective, the demo is to where what you've developed so far is demoed to the stakeholders, and the retrospect is where the team sort of reflects at 4:30 Friday afternoon on how we did and how we can do the next 3 weeks better. So there you have it, folks. So some of the lessons from the pandemic, and we've seen it in a number of companies, not only the vaccine companies, but others, to accelerate development. Effective portfolio management to focus on fewer projects and better projects. And I showed you one example of tools used at a good portfolio review. Focus teams, where people are much more dedicated to the one project. So instead of doing 6 projects slowly, let's pick our best 3 and focus our people. New digital tools, from rapid prototyping for artificial intelligence, voice of customer. I didn't get into all of them, but there's a number of tools there that were listed on that chart. And then leaning down your innovation process, like that Danfoss company did, or the company that was making the component for the paper machine, getting rid of the waste, and also looking to parallel processing or simultaneous execution to speed things up. And then finally, the latest trick many companies are trying, and I know some ISBM companies are, because we had a presentation at last year's members meeting, Agile built into the stage gate process, where the companies are adopting some, not all, of the principles and methods found in the Agile methodology from Silicon Valley. So there you have it, folks. I'm 5 minutes more further than I meant, over what I meant, but time for some Q&A, I hope.
Yep, we've had some folks that are typing some questions into chat. I said we'd kind of wait till you wrapped up. So
okay, let me go back to where I can see people. Okay,
because you can let people just unmute if they want to ask a question direct.
Sure, fire away.
Jerry, Tim, do you want to?
Yeah, I'd love to ask my question. Great presentation. You touched on every sin I've seen out there except for one. A complaint that I hear from a lot of product development organizations is that their pipeline gets taken over by one-off custom projects for key accounts.
Yeah.
And it's all part of their giving, great service to their key accounts. Yeah. And what they complain is that they never get to stand back and do the 2-year project.
Yeah.
Because they're just trying to service them. How do you deal with that?
Well, that was one of the things that actually came out in a slide that I mentioned very early on. Jerry, excellent question, by the way, and you're right on. I see that as well. This slide here, that was the second one I showed. A lot of smaller projects, very often one-off projects or single customer projects, rather than the big, bold, higher value projects that maybe will be the next engine of growth for the company. One of the techniques that I've seen used, and I didn't invent it, we call it strategic buckets, which is where first of all, you have to have an appreciation or some good data on what proportion of resources are going to different project types. For example, simplistically, let's say we said there's 3 kinds of projects in our business. We have the big, bold breakthrough projects that are going to be the next aha, the next generation, whatever. Then we have our medium-sized new product projects. These are significant new product projects, but they're still not the big, bold breakthrough engines of growth. And then we got the smaller tweaks, modifications, the one-offs, the single customer requests, etc. And invariably you see that one group is starting to dominate and maybe dominate too much, as Jerry said. The single customer requests, the one-offs, the Salesforce request projects, I often call them.
Mhm.
So the first thing is to get an appreciation of where the resources are going. And usually a set of pie charts. I see some companies do a breakdown, numbers of projects by those three categories, pie chart, percentage of resources going to each type. And then sometimes they even get into a pie chart that shows where the sales are coming from, you know, which of these project types are generating the revenue. Then the next question is, once you've sort of figured out the current situation, then you get into a discussion of the what is. Okay, guys, we got 70% of our resources going to these single customer request projects. What should it be? Let's have a discussion around that. Now, this is obviously a leadership team issue. So it's a leadership team and they get into a discussion. You know, we're spending 70% here and boy, oh boy, that's an awful lot of money. And maybe we should bring that, try to get that down to 50% so we can spend at least 20% on the bold innovations. So let's say management decides we're going to move it from 70 down to 50%. So then the next step, Jerry, is to take all the projects in that bucket. We call this strategic bucket. So that's a bucket. Tweaks, modifications, improvements, and single customer request projects. Take all the projects that we got and put them on an Excel spreadsheet, not unlike the one I showed, and rank them from 1 to n. So let's say we got 50 projects in that smaller project category. So we rank them 1 to n, 1 to 50. And then we go down the list until we run out of that 50% we said we were going to spend there and draw the line. Not unlike we did in that diagram. It's a technique called strategic buckets. It's a very quick explanation, and without pie charts and numbers, it's sort of hard to illustrate it. But if anyone's interested, I can sort of point you to some description of it. It's a very powerful technique for making sure that the resources are going to the resources are going to the right mix and balance of projects in your portfolio. Make sense?
It does. The part that I always find deceptive is companies have a way of prioritizing those projects by saying, well, yeah, we're creating it for company A, but boy, we'll be able to sell that to dozens of other companies. And somehow it never works out that way.
You're right. Yeah, they lie. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, obviously you got to have some discipline here. You know, you can set wonderful systems in place, but if you break the rules every 2 days, it's not going to work too well, is it? So you got to have, you know, and I guess that's why you need a good overseer, you know, an air traffic controller, so to speak, a portfolio manager, somebody like that, like this sample company I showed actually had a portfolio manager to make sure the rules are enforced and followed from time to time, right, Jerry?
Thanks, Bob.
Hey, Dr. Cooper, I wanted to ask a question going back to that same topic, or maybe further, if you go back to your list of those projects and how you prioritized them. You know, I was very curious about that Dental A project because it was really low on the list, both from the project attractiveness and index, but the resources was super high, right? They got the 5 that they asked for, but in the end,
no, they didn't. Don't forget. If you go across here, they were asking for 5. This is what they got.
Yeah, no, I meant prior. I think prior they asked for 5 and they got 5.
Oh, you know why that was?
Yeah,
That's a good one.
So who's the portfolio manager, and how did that thing get interrupted? I imagine
well, okay,
it's another
the managing
executive
director here is a guy called Peter. Okay, and Peter started the company, and it's almost $1 billion company. He's been very successful. He's in his 60s. He's a big man, larger than life. I used to call him Peter the Great because he really, you know, very imposing figure. Peter had 2 executives' pet projects, which he was so proud of. As soon as I arrived, this is my second visit to the company. As soon as I arrived this time, he took me to both project team rooms. And guess which ones they were?
Pump and Dental A.
Dental A, and the other one was Pump.
Right.
And those were Peter's pride and joy. And Peter almost cried when the list came up and showed that Dental A should be killed. But everyone looked at him and said, Peter, come on, you know, this is not that great a project. And he finally agreed that it should be put on the hold list. It wasn't killed, it was put on a hold list and got 0. but he had two pet projects here. I should have said that, dental A and pump.
Yeah, I
And
figured
you
as
notice
much.
that both of them were getting the resources more than they should have probably.
And
But what do you do with an executive who has I'm sure you've seen that happen in your company where some executive sponsors a project and it's hard for them to let go.
Of course, yeah. So that portfolio manager has a very delicate task at hand.
Yes, he does, or she does, but it would happen to be a he in this case. But the big boss wasn't a stupid man either. He didn't get to where he was for being stupid. So I think he began to see that.
So this is a change management, effort where you got to get all the communications and get everyone lined up, put their hand on the bag and say, we're going to this meeting, and telling Peter the Great that Dental A is getting nothing.
Yeah. Well,
Very good.
the other thing that the portfolio manager enforced, he put in place some pretty good data-based or fact-based methods. One of them was this productivity index, which is a pretty powerful tool. Basically you say, hey, Peter, come on. For every day we spend on this project, we make $190. For every day we spend on this one, we make 340. Where do you want to spend your time?
Yeah.
So this is a German-speaking company. I think it was just outside Vienna. As I say, I've deliberately picked ones here so as not to compromise anybody in the room at our meeting here, Lynn.
Ryan
the-
Ryan has kind of a follow-up question to that,
Yeah.
which is, in your experience, which function is best at administering the stage gate process?
Boy, I don't know. I don't think there was an answer to that. I've seen the person in charge of the stage gate process report to the senior person in marketing in some companies, or in R&D or RD&E in other companies. And sometimes I've even seen it report to both people. And I can honestly say it's, I don't have a conclusion as to which works best, but it's got to report to one or the other or both.
And is project prioritization got to report to the same person, or is that a different function?
Well, it depends on what the role of that, let me use it for lack of a better word, portfolio manager or stage gate manager's job is. If that person's job description is to be in charge of the new product process, including portfolio management, that person would then, like this portfolio manager in this particular example, I remember his name was Magnus, German guy. He had a delicate job, as Jerry said, but as somebody else said, but he basically reported to the head of R&D in this particular company. Now, he could have reported just as easily to the head of marketing, but one of the senior people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So another question is on customer validation. So I think we've all been here. The timeline for customer validation often feels like it's completely out of our control. You give it to the customer and then, So what are some ways to speed the validation process that has to happen with customers?
Okay, good, very good question, and not too many easy answers. One more straightforward answer is obviously working with customers as partners and making sure it is a win-win for them. That example I showed of the paper company, the company making the component for a paper machine, did work very closely with some pretty big customers like International Paper, but unfortunately, the field trials that were taking so long to get customer feedback was not a win-win for the paper company. It often required them to shut down their machines. Sometimes the field trial didn't work. There was no compensation and so on. So much more so, they had to start treating these guys as equal partners. And one of the things they did, for example, was say, look, if the field trials work, and if you give us fast feedback and work with us, the deal is we'll give you exclusivity on this product for the next so many years. In other words, we'll work with you, International Paper, and Georgia Pacific won't get it. Fair enough? That's the deal. So working on a partnering, a win-win basis, making it worth their while. A second one, sometimes, and I'll use a real case here. I don't want to mention the name of the company, but this is a company that is in the state of Pennsylvania. They invented the acrylics business. You probably know who I mean. They got bought out by a large chemical company some years ago. They were developing new acrylics for the paint industry. Well, the paint industry is incredibly slow. You know, you got Benjamin Moore and Sherwin-Williams and all these guys. So the woman who was in charge of product development basically said, this is killing us. We develop a new acrylic, we send it out to them, they put it on a slow boat to India, they get results, 4 weeks later. It's killing us. The first thing she said is that what I had to do was sit down with a couple of key paint companies. And she picked one in particular who said, we want to innovate quickly. Okay, you want to innovate quickly? Here's the deal. We give you a sample, you get the results to us in 3 weeks. Deal? Deal. And basically they had sort of this 3-week cycle, this 3-week sprint that they got on. And it was a real rhythm. She says that works very, very well because this company indicated they were prepared to work on that basis. So that is one approach, partnering with people, paper company example, acrylics company example. Another one is this. You don't always have to have a finished product in order to give it to the customer for him or her to do field trials. How about a virtual product? How about a product that can be delivered electronically? For example, the first version of the product can be CAD drawings or a simulation or some kind of animation. And some of this stuff can be done by Zoom. You don't have to physically go to the customer and put a product on his desk and say, here, try it for the next 4 weeks. So some of these earlier versions in the iterations can be much simpler versions of the product, some of which can even be delivered electronically for initial reaction by the customer. So we're not always talking about a finished prototype. We call these between concepts and prototypes, protoceps. And people are getting pretty imaginative about how they demo a product to a customer without actually being there.
I just want to make sure that wasn't Kelly. So what it also strikes me is, Bob, is that in negotiating the sale of the testing before the sale of the product, in negotiating that, you also get confirmation that they will participate before you even start the project, because doing the project work and having no one validate it is really the biggest waste ever, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, part of it is win-win. It's got to be win for both parties.
Yeah, yeah.
Like in this paint example or acrylics example, the win for the paint company was they got this new acrylic version before any of the other big guys, and they could therefore get on TV and start advertising, we got a paint that does such and such.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just going to call out any more questions. We've run a little bit over. Okay, thank you, Kelly. And of course, the chat window is going to stay open for a little bit longer. And Bob is always available, and you can reach any of our speakers by contacting Lori and I, and we'll make sure that we get questions back to them.
Okay.
Bob, go ahead.
One thing I was going to say is there were a couple of questions that I wasn't really able to answer well without pictures and charts and things like that. My webpage, Lynn, as you know, is available to anyone, and there's a list of articles there. And you have a couple of mine, right?
Yep, I do.
That you can send people, including this accelerated development and also the pandemic pivot. I think you have that one, so you can fire that out to people maybe that were in attendance.
Yeah, Lori will take a note of that. We'll make sure we put that in the next newsletter. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Great. All right. Well, so for all of you that are still with us, and for those of you that joined us yesterday, thank you so much too. It was just so nice to have a social interaction with you. I hope you'll join us again, either at the Marketing Excellence meeting, which is still virtual, but we're getting so close, and our next member meeting, which will be in person somewhere in October. I'll put that on your calendar. Thank you all for joining us, and to all of our speakers, thank you so much for your time and all of the extra work. For those that are looking to watch it again or to recommend it to someone, these recordings will probably be available sometime in the middle of next week, along with the slides. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Mm-hmm.